I wasn't always the kind of guy who had it all together. In fact, my childhood felt like a never-ending uphill battle. My parents worked themselves to the bone, barely scraping by just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. From a young age, I understood the weight of hard work and what it meant to sacrifice. There were nights when dinner was nothing but beans and rice, but my parents always made it a point to gather us around the table, pretending it was a banquet. They taught me that real wealth isn't measured in possessions but in the love you share as a family. That lesson stayed with me and shaped the man I eventually became. By the time I hit 18, my dad's health had taken a steep decline, leaving me with no choice but to step up for my family. I got a job at a local auto repair shop, working long shifts while my friends were heading off to college. It wasn't glamorous, but there was something deeply satisfying about fixing things. Taking something broken and giving it a second life. I picked up the trade fast and soon became one of the most trusted mechanics in our small town. People knew they could count on me and I took pride in that. But no matter how much I accomplished, there was always an ache inside me for something more. I wanted a family of my own, a wife and kids I could pour my love and energy into. When I met Emily, everything in my life seemed to fall into place. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever met before. She was smart, kind, and breathtakingly beautiful. Her smile could brighten even my darkest days, and her laugh felt like the cure for every worry I had. We fell in love faster than I ever thought possible, and before I knew it, we were standing side by side, exchanging vows and promising forever. I believed I had found the partner who would stand by me through life's highs and lows. Together, we built a life I was incredibly proud of. A warm, lively home, 2 amazing sons, and a future that felt as bright as the sun. I threw myself into being the best husband and father I could be, working tirelessly to provide for them. To me, every sacrifice was worth it because I believed in the family we'd created. It wasn't just a duty, it was my greatest joy. But as I would painfully discover, even the strongest foundations can collapse when you fail to notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. Life is full of small, seemingly insignificant moments that can lead to disastrous outcomes. Think about the Challenger space shuttle disaster in 1986. A tiny, inexpensive O-ring caused a catastrophic failure, leading to the loss of lives and irreparable damage. Or consider how a blood clot, no bigger than a grain of sand, can block the flow of blood to the brain and end a life in an instant. Even something as simple as an icy patch on the road can send a car spinning out of control and change everything. Reflecting on these events, I can't help but draw a parallel to my own life. The things that seem small and harmless often hold the power to tear down everything you hold dear. Marriage is no small endeavor. It's a monumental commitment, one that defines the course of your life. And for me, my marriage was the most important thing I'd ever taken on. Emily and I had been married for just over 8 years. Together, we had 2 incredible boys, Alex and Ben. Alex carried my name, and Ben was named after my father. We had a cozy home, perfect for raising a family, and while I never had the chance to go to college, I built a solid career as a mechanic. My skills allowed me to give my family the kind of life I had always dreamed of for them. Every long hour I worked felt worthwhile because I believed I was building something special. My marriage was my greatest pride and the responsibility I cherished most. But as it turns out, sometimes it's the smallest details that lead to the biggest downfalls. For me, everything started to unravel because of a single, tiny blood vessel in my brain. One day, out of nowhere, I was hit with a migraine so severe it felt like my skull was splitting in half. I dealt with migraines before, but this one came out of nowhere, and it hit like a freight train. The light became unbearable. Every sound felt like nails on a chalkboard, and even the faintest smell turned my stomach. I recognized the symptoms immediately, but the worst part was that I didn't have my Imitrex inhaler with me. Without it, there was no way to quickly get the pain under control. The pills I had on hand were slower to act and not nearly as effective. The pain was so bad I could barely stand, let alone keep working. I stumbled into my boss's office, barely managing to explain what was happening. He looked alarmed and called over his secretary, Karen, telling her to take me home. "Don't let him drive," he instructed. "Get him home, And do it fast. Karen and my boss helped me outside, and she left me leaning against the wall while she went to get her car. I closed my eyes against the harsh daylight, pressing my hands against my temples, trying to keep from passing out. Once in the car, I leaned back and shut everything out. The light, the sounds, the smells. Karen knew where I lived, so I didn't have to give her any directions. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, we pulled into my driveway. She helped me inside, guiding me to the kitchen as I stumbled along. I managed to direct her to the fridge, where she found my inhaler. She placed it in my hand, steadying me as I used it. Relief came slowly, but it was there. I felt the medication start to ease the crushing pressure in my head. Karen helped me to the living room and got me settled on the couch. She closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and didn't leave until I assured her I was starting to feel better. After thanking her, I let the quiet of the house wash over me and fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke up, the house was dark, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the couch, the migraine, Karen driving me home. The pain was mostly gone, but I still felt weak and drained. As I sat up, I heard voices drifting in from the kitchen. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but as I focused, I realized it was Emily and our neighbor, Rachel. They hadn't noticed I was home. The lights were off and my car wasn't in the driveway, so they must have assumed I was still at work. I stood up, ready to surprise them, but something in their tones stopped me. Rachel's voice was hushed but excited. "So, Emily, spill the details. Was it as good as before?" Emily laughed softly, and her reply froze me in place. "It was incredible," she said. "Even better than last time. Honestly, it was mind-blowing. The best I've ever had." Rachel gasped. "Better than with Jack? Better than your husband?" Without hesitation, Emily answered, "Oh, absolutely. Jack's great, but he's never made me feel like that. Never. And, of course, I'd never let him do the things Carl does. Jack would think I'm some kind of tramp if I did." Rachel laughed nervously. "So, does that mean Carl thinks you're a tramp?" Emily smirked. "Maybe, but I don't care. I like being his tramp. God, I can't wait for the next time." I stood frozen in place, my stomach churning as Emily's words echoed in my mind. Carl. That name embedded itself into my memory, even though I didn't yet have a face to associate with it. My chest tightened, my heart pounded like a drum, and the room around me seemed to tilt. A wave of nausea crawled up my throat. Her words weren't careless or accidental. They carried a sense of excitement, even pride. It was as if she were recounting some thrilling vacation, not confessing to a complete violation of our vows. Rachel's voice cut through the fog in my head. "Aren't you scared Jack will find out? What would he do? Have you thought this through? You're playing with fire, Emily." Emily let out a laugh that was sharp and dismissive, almost bitter. "Jack won't ever find out. And even if he did, what would he do about it? Nothing. He's too nice, too forgiving. He wouldn't risk losing the kids. He adores them too much, and he knows I'd take them away without hesitation. The right lawyer would eat him alive." Rachel's tone shifted, her nervousness evident. "That doesn't sound like you, Emily. I've never heard you talk about Jack like this. How can you say you love him and still do this? It's not like you. You're scaring me. I think you're making a huge mistake." Emily's voice softened, but it wasn't the kind of soft that came from regret. It felt calculated, deliberate. "I do love Jack. I really do. But I don't want to let go of Carl either. I want both, the love I get from Jack and the passion I get from Carl. I need them both, and I'm not giving that up." That was it. I'd heard enough. My migraine was gone, but what replaced it was far worse. A pain so raw, so deep in my chest, it felt like my ribs might crack under the pressure. My stomach twisted, my breath caught in my throat, and my ears rang. For a brief moment, I thought I might pass out or even drop dead right there in the hallway. I gripped the door frame to steady myself, willing my body to stay upright. Once the initial shock wore off, a wave of anger surged through me like nothing I'd ever felt before. It wasn't just anger. It was humiliation, sorrow, and rage all tangled into one. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. With a deep breath, I squared my shoulders, straightened my back, and walked into the kitchen. The second I entered, the room fell silent as if someone had cut the sound from a movie. Rachel spotted me first, her eyes widening and her mouth dropping open in shock. She quickly covered her mouth with her hand and whispered, "Oh no!" Emily turned to see what Rachel was looking at, and her expression shifted in an instant. First, there was shock, then a flicker of fear, and finally, it settled into something sharp and defensive: anger. She shoved her chair back and stood up, her posture stiff and confrontational. "How much did you hear?" she demanded, her voice sharp and accusatory. "Why the hell were you eavesdropping on me like that? Spying on your own wife?" I stared at her, struggling to comprehend the situation. My mind was reeling, trying to piece together everything I had just heard. My gaze flicked over to Rachel, who immediately grabbed her purse and bolted for the door, mumbling an excuse about needing to leave. "I'll call you later," she said hurriedly to Emily before slipping out, leaving the two of us alone. I turned back to Emily, the woman I had loved with everything I had for the past 8 years. I thought we were going to grow old together, raising our boys and building a life we could be proud of. But those dreams had just gone up in flames, and the woman standing in front of me now felt like a stranger. The person I thought I knew was gone, replaced by someone cold, selfish, and unrecognizable. "Where are the boys?" I asked, my voice calm but razor-sharp. "Where were they while you were busy with your boyfriend? Were they even on your mind? Or were you too caught up in your thrill to care?" Her face twisted with anger, and the soft beauty I had once adored was replaced by something bitter and harsh. "They're with Carly," she snapped. "Rachel and I went shopping, and Pete was watching them. I wasn't with anyone else, Jack, just Rachel." "God, you're unbelievable." Her tone was defiant, as if she thought she'd just won an argument. But then her smugness faded, and her face grew pale as realization dawned. "Wait a second. Why are you even here? Where's your car? Were you hiding here, waiting to catch me in something?" I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. "I came home early with a migraine," I said flatly. "George had Karen drive me home because I couldn't even see straight, let alone drive. I took my medication and passed out on the couch. I've been here this whole time, Emily. I've been here listening." Her expression darkened, but I didn't stick around to see what she'd say next. The nausea that had been building finally won. I stormed off to the bathroom, barely making it before I dropped to my knees in front of the toilet. My body convulsed, but nothing came up. I sat there on the cold tile floor, my forehead pressed against the cool porcelain, trying to keep it together. Eventually, the nausea faded, and my breathing slowed. When I felt steady enough, I returned to the kitchen. Emily was still sitting at the table, staring blankly out the window. I couldn't read her expression, and honestly, I didn't care. I felt numb, like all the love and trust I'd ever had for her had been drained out of me in one night. "I'm going to get the boys," I said coldly. "I'll put them to bed tonight." Without waiting for her to respond, I grabbed my keys and walked out the door. I made my way to Pete and Rachel's house next door. Pete and Rachel had always been our closest friends. At least that's what I thought. We'd spent countless nights in their living room, sharing drinks and stories. The betrayal I felt wasn't just about Emily. It was about all of it. The lies, the deceit. It felt like my entire world had been turned upside down. When I stepped into their kitchen, Pete was sitting at the table, looking confused and concerned. Rachel sat across from him, staring down at the table like she wanted to disappear. "I'm here to pick up the boys," I said, walking past Pete without even looking at him. Rachel stood up quickly, gesturing toward the living room. "Carly's with them." "I'll grab their jackets," she said, avoiding eye contact. In the living room, I found Alex and Ben working on a puzzle with Carly, their teenage daughter. Carly smiled at me, clearly oblivious to the tension simmering between the adults. "Hey, Mr. Carter, are you here for Alex and Ben?" she asked cheerfully. "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. Thanks for watching them, Carly. I'll wait in the kitchen while they finish up. Back in the kitchen, Pete and Rachel sat in awkward silence, clearly bracing for what I was about to say. I turned to Pete first, my voice cold and sharp. Did you know? Did either of you know about this? About Carl? About her cheating on me? I demanded. Pete, how did it feel sitting in my house, drinking my beer, and knowing what was going on? Pete's face darkened, and he shot Rachel an angry look before answering. Jack, I swear, I didn't know a damn thing. If I had, I'd have told you right away. I don't know how Rachel kept this from me either. You don't deserve this, man. I'm sorry for her. But I'm here if you need anything. I studied him for a moment and saw the sincerity in his face. If Pete had known, he would have said something. This had been Rachel and Emily's secret, their betrayal. I turned to Rachel, who was still avoiding my eyes. Thanks, Rachel, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Thanks for letting me play the fool. I hope it was worth it. I heard Carly come into the room with the boys, and I forced another smile as they ran to me, holding cookies in their small hands. They were grinning, completely unaware of the storm raging around them. I vowed to protect them from this mess, no matter how much it hurt. That night, after I put them to bed, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the walls of the home I'd built with Emily. It didn't feel like home anymore. Felt empty, hollow. The life I thought I had was gone, and deep down, I knew this was just the beginning of a long, painful road ahead. When I came back downstairs after tucking Alex and Ben into bed, Emily was still sitting in the living room. She perched on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped tightly together, staring blankly at the floor like a guilty child awaiting punishment. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen from crying. But instead of feeling pity, I felt hollow, like the love and trust one had for her had drained out of me completely. This woman wasn't the Emily I thought I married 8 years ago. That Emily, the one I loved and sacrificed so much for, was gone. I sank into the armchair across from her, the one she'd bought me for our 5th anniversary. It used to be my favorite spot in the house, a place where I could unwind and feel at peace. But tonight, it felt cold and unfamiliar. Just another piece of furniture in a home that didn't feel like mine anymore. I leaned back, resting my hands on the arms of the chair, and broke the silence. Who is he? I asked, my voice steady but cold. What does he have that I don't? She looked up at me, her lips trembling, but didn't answer right away. After a long pause, she finally whispered, Jack, it's not about you. It's not that you're not enough or that you did something wrong. It's complicated. I let out a bitter laugh, shaking my head. Complicated? I repeated, the words stinging on my tongue. That's your excuse? You cheat on me, destroy everything we've built, and that's all you can say? It's complicated? Just tell me the truth, Emily. Be honest with me for once. Her expression hardened, tears giving way to a flash of anger. Fine, she snapped. You want the truth? Carl makes me feel alive. He makes me feel wanted, like a woman again. Jack, you're a good husband, you always have been, and I love you for that. But you're safe, predictable. Carl is exciting, and for the first time in years, I feel free. Her words hit me like a gut punch, knocking the air from my lungs. I thought I was a good husband. I worked hard, gave her everything I had, and made countless sacrifices for our family. And now, she was sitting here telling me that none of it mattered, that I wasn't enough. I leaned forward, gripping the armrests so tightly that my hands started to ache. So that's it? I said quietly, anger boiling beneath my words. I gave you everything, Emily. I worked myself to the bone so you and the boys could have the life you wanted. And in return, you go sneaking off with some guy who has nothing to lose? Do you even care what you've done? Her shoulders stiffened as she looked at me, defiant. Of course I care, she shot back. I never wanted to hurt you, Jack. I didn't want you to find out. But now that you have, we can talk about it. We can figure out how to move forward. This doesn't have to be the end for us. If you could just try to understand. Understand. I interrupted, staring at her in disbelief. You think I'm just going to accept this? You're not even sorry for what you did. You're only sorry that I found out. You don't regret cheating. You regret getting caught. Her words from earlier that day replayed in my mind. Jack will never find out. And even if he does, so what? He won't do anything. She had been so sure of herself, so confident I would forgive her. But she was wrong. I stood up, pacing the room, trying to rein in the tidal wave of emotions crashing inside me. Anger, humiliation, heartbreak. I couldn't let it consume me. I needed to think clearly. After a moment, I stopped and faced her again. Can you promise me it's over? I asked, my voice calm but sharp. Can you tell me, right now, that you'll cut him out of your life completely? That you'll stop seeing him and actually try to fix what's left of this marriage? Her hesitation said more than words ever could. She couldn't look me in the eye, and the silence between us grew unbearable. In that moment, I knew it was over. Any shred of hope I'd been clinging to evaporated. That's what I thought, I said quietly. You don't want to let him go. You want both of us, don't you? You think I'll just sit here and put up with it. But you're wrong. I'm done, Emily. This ends now. Tears filled her eyes as she reached out to me, her voice trembling. Jack, please, don't do this. I love you. You're my husband, the father of my children. I don't want to lose you. I stepped back, out of her reach, shaking my head. You already lost me, Emily, I said, my voice steady but full of finality. You lost me the moment you chose him over us. There's no coming back from this. I turned and grabbed my keys from the counter. I'm going to stay at Clyde's for a while, I said, keeping my back to her. I'll come home after work to see Alex and Ben, but as far as you and I go, we're done. Just as I opened the door, her voice rang out again. This time it wasn't pleading. It was cold and venomous. If you leave, I'll take everything, she said sharply. The house, the kids, the money, you'll lose it all. You'll regret this, Jack. Her words hung in the air like a threat, but I refused to let them shake me. I turned to face her, my expression hard. Take it all, I said evenly. But don't forget this. When you push a man to the edge, you'd better be ready for what happens next. I slammed the door behind me, the sound reverberating through the house like a final goodbye. Climbing into my truck, I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My whole world had just crumbled, and all I felt was anger, a burning rage that threatened to consume me. I wasn't always the kind of guy who had it all together. In fact, my childhood felt like a never-ending uphill battle. My parents worked themselves to the bone, barely scraping by just to keep the lights on and put food on the table. From a young age, I understood the weight of hard work and what it meant to sacrifice. There were nights when dinner was nothing but beans and rice, but my parents always made it a point to gather us around the table, pretending it was a banquet. They taught me that real wealth isn't measured in possessions but in the love you share as a family. That lesson stayed with me and shaped the man I eventually became. By the time I hit 18, my dad's health had taken a steep decline, leaving me with no choice but to step up for my family. I got a job at a local auto repair shop, working long shifts while my friends were heading off to college. It wasn't glamorous, but there was something deeply satisfying about fixing things. Taking something broken and giving it a second life. I picked up the trade fast and soon became one of the most trusted mechanics in our small town. People knew they could count on me and I took pride in that. But no matter how much I accomplished, there was always an ache inside me for something more. I wanted a family of my own, a wife and kids I could pour my love and energy into. When I met Emily, everything in my life seemed to fall into place. She wasn't like anyone I'd ever met before. She was smart, kind, and breathtakingly beautiful. Her smile could brighten even my darkest days, and her laugh felt like the cure for every worry I had. We fell in love faster than I ever thought possible, and before I knew it, we were standing side by side, exchanging vows and promising forever. I believed I had found the partner who would stand by me through life's highs and lows. Together, we built a life I was incredibly proud of. A warm, lively home, 2 amazing sons, and a future that felt as bright as the sun. I threw myself into being the best husband and father I could be, working tirelessly to provide for them. To me, every sacrifice was worth it because I believed in the family we'd created. It wasn't just a duty, it was my greatest joy. But as I would painfully discover, even the strongest foundations can collapse when you fail to notice the cracks forming beneath the surface. Life is full of small, seemingly insignificant moments that can lead to disastrous outcomes. Think about the Challenger space shuttle disaster in 1986. A tiny, inexpensive O-ring caused a catastrophic failure, leading to the loss of lives and irreparable damage. Or consider how a blood clot, no bigger than a grain of sand, can block the flow of blood to the brain and end a life in an instant. Even something as simple as an icy patch on the road can send a car spinning out of control and change everything. Reflecting on these events, I can't help but draw a parallel to my own life. The things that seem small and harmless often hold the power to tear down everything you hold dear. Marriage is no small endeavor. It's a monumental commitment, one that defines the course of your life. And for me, my marriage was the most important thing I'd ever taken on. Emily and I had been married for just over 8 years. Together, we had 2 incredible boys, Alex and Ben. Alex carried my name, and Ben was named after my father. We had a cozy home, perfect for raising a family, and while I never had the chance to go to college, I built a solid career as a mechanic. My skills allowed me to give my family the kind of life I had always dreamed of for them. Every long hour I worked felt worthwhile because I believed I was building something special. My marriage was my greatest pride and the responsibility I cherished most. But as it turns out, sometimes it's the smallest details that lead to the biggest downfalls. For me, everything started to unravel because of a single, tiny blood vessel in my brain. One day, out of nowhere, I was hit with a migraine so severe it felt like my skull was splitting in half. I dealt with migraines before, but this one came out of nowhere, and it hit like a freight train. The light became unbearable. Every sound felt like nails on a chalkboard, and even the faintest smell turned my stomach. I recognized the symptoms immediately, but the worst part was that I didn't have my Imitrex inhaler with me. Without it, there was no way to quickly get the pain under control. The pills I had on hand were slower to act and not nearly as effective. The pain was so bad I could barely stand, let alone keep working. I stumbled into my boss's office, barely managing to explain what was happening. He looked alarmed and called over his secretary, Karen, telling her to take me home. "Don't let him drive," he instructed. "Get him home, and do it fast." Karen and my boss helped me outside, and she left me leaning against the wall while she went to get her car. I closed my eyes against the harsh daylight, pressing my hands against my temples, trying to keep from passing out. Once in the car, I leaned back and shut everything out. The light, the sounds, the smells. Karen knew where I lived, so I didn't have to give her any directions. It felt like an eternity, but eventually, we pulled into my driveway. She helped me inside, guiding me to the kitchen as I stumbled along. I managed to direct her to the fridge, where she found my inhaler. She placed it in my hand, steadying me as I used it. Relief came slowly, but it was there. I felt the medication start to ease the crushing pressure in my head. Karen helped me to the living room and got me settled on the couch. She closed the blinds, turned off the lights, and didn't leave until I assured her I was starting to feel better. After thanking her, I let the quiet of the house wash over me and fell asleep almost instantly. When I woke up, the house was dark, and for a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered the couch, the migraine, Karen driving me home. The pain was mostly gone, but I still felt weak and drained. As I sat up, I heard voices drifting in from the kitchen. At first, I couldn't make out the words, but as I focused, I realized it was Emily and our neighbor, Rachel. They hadn't noticed I was home. The lights were off and my car wasn't in the driveway, so they must have assumed I was still at work. I stood up, ready to surprise them, but something in their tones stopped me. Rachel's voice was hushed but excited. "So, Emily, spill the details. Was it as good as before?" Emily laughed softly, and her reply froze me in place. "It was incredible," she said. "Even better than last time." Honestly, it was mind-blowing. The best I've ever had. Rachel gasped. Better than with Jack? Better than your husband? Without hesitation, Emily answered, Oh, absolutely. Jack's great, but he's never made me feel like that. Never. And, of course, I'd never let him do the things Carl does. Jack would think I'm some kind of tramp if I did. Rachel laughed nervously. So, does that mean Carl thinks you're a tramp? Emily smirked. Maybe, but I don't care. I like being his tramp. God, I can't wait for the next time. The room felt heavy after my outburst, like all the air had been sucked out of it. Emily sat frozen on the couch, her face pale and her hands clutching the armrest like she was bracing for impact. For the first time in years, I saw fear in her eyes. Not fear of me, because I'd never hurt her, but fear of the man I'd become. The nice guy she thought she could control, the one who'd forgive anything and keep the peace, was gone. She didn't know how to handle this version of me, the one who was no longer willing to play her games. Her voice, when it finally came, was small and shaky. Jack, please don't do this. I don't want us to end like this. We can fix it. I'll do whatever it takes. I swear. I made a mistake, but we can move past it. We can go back to the way things were. I stared at her, my expression cold and unflinching. Back to the way things were? I repeated, my voice sharp with bitterness. You mean back when I worked myself to exhaustion for this family, only for you to thank me by sneaking around with Carl? Or maybe you're talking about when you laughed with Robin behind my back, bragging about how you could get away with it because I'd never leave. Tell me, Emily, what part of how things were do you miss the most? Tears streamed down her face, and she buried it in her hands, her body shaking with sobs. It was a sight that once would have broken my heart, but now it just felt hollow. Her tears didn't move me anymore. They felt manipulative, a desperate attempt to sway me. She wasn't crying because she regretted what she'd done. She was crying because she knew she'd lost her grip on me. When she finally looked up, her face streaked with tears, I saw desperation in her eyes. What do you want me to say, Jack? She asked, her voice trembling. That I'm sorry? That I regret what I did? Because I do. I was stupid and selfish and I made a terrible mistake. But I love you. I've always loved you. Doesn't that mean anything? I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Love, I said, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. You don't know what love is, Emily. Love isn't lying to someone's face, sneaking around, and humiliating them for your own selfish pleasure. Love is loyalty, it's respect, it's sacrifice. And you threw all of that away the moment you chose him. Her tears dried up almost instantly, replaced by a flash of anger. And what about you? She snapped. You think you're perfect? You work all the time, Jack. You're never here. I'm the one who keeps this house running, who takes care of Alex and Ben, while you're out playing the hero. Do you even know what it feels like to be invisible in your own marriage? To feel like you're just part of the furniture in someone else's life? Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I didn't let it show. I'd spent years working long hours, sacrificing time and energy, all to provide for our family. I thought that's what a husband and father was supposed to do. And now she was using it against me, twisting my dedication into a flaw. Don't you dare blame this on me, I said, my voice low and simmering with anger. I worked hard because I thought I was building something for us, for our family. I thought you appreciated it. I never complained about the sacrifices I made because I believed it was worth it. But now I see it wasn't enough for you. Nothing ever is. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. You could have come to me, Emily. If you were unhappy, if you felt neglected, you could have said something. We could have worked through it. But instead, you decided to cheat, to betray me, and then act like you're the victim. Well, you're not the victim here. I am. And I'm done letting you twist this around on me. Her defiance crumbled, and she slumped back into her chair, defeated. For a moment, I thought she might finally accept responsibility for what she'd done. But then her expression hardened, and the anger returned to her eyes. So that's it then? She said, her voice cold. You're just going to walk away? Throw everything we've built away because of one mistake? I laughed again, a bitter, humorless sound. One mistake, I said, my voice rising. You didn't accidentally trip and fall into his bed, Emily. You made a choice. And then you made it again and again every time you went to see him. This wasn't a one-time thing, it was an ongoing betrayal. And now you want to downplay it, act like it's no big deal. But it is. You destroyed our marriage, and there's no coming back from that. She glared at me, venom dripping from her voice. Fine, she said. If you want to play the victim, go ahead. But don't think for a second I'm just going to roll over and let you take everything. If you file for divorce, I'll fight you every step of the way. I'll take the house, the money, and the boys. You'll be left with nothing. Her threat hit me like a slap, but I refused to show it. I stared at her, my face calm, even as her words twisted the knife in my heart. The woman I had loved, the mother of my children, was threatening to destroy me, just to punish me for not letting her get away with cheating. It was cruel and it left me reeling. But then, strangely, I felt a calm settle over me. I realized in that moment that she'd already taken everything that mattered. The love, the trust, the life we'd built. It was all gone. And with nothing left to lose, I felt free. Do what you have to do, I said quietly, my voice steady. But understand this. I won't make it easy for you. If you want to destroy our family just to spite me, you'll have to live with the consequences. And trust me, Emily, you won't like what those consequences are. The day after I filed for divorce, I came home to a house that no longer felt like mine. My lawyer had been clear. If I wanted a strong shot at custody of Alex and Ben, I couldn't move out. Staying in that house was the only way to keep my footing. The thought of pretending everything was fine under the same roof as Emily turned my stomach. But for my boys, I would endure it. When I stepped inside, Emily was waiting for me in the kitchen. She had clearly put effort into her appearance, her hair styled, her blouse crisp. Once, the sight of her like this might have softened me. Now all I could see was the act. This wasn't about love or regret. This was manipulation. She thought she could pull me back in, but she didn't realize that version of me no longer existed. Hi, she said softly, her tone careful. I made dinner. I thought maybe we could sit down as a family. Her words made me laugh. A sharp, bitter sound that echoed in the room. Her expression faltered. You think a plate of food is going to fix this? I asked coldly. You think we can just sit at the table like nothing happened? Like you didn't destroy our family because of your selfishness? Her cheeks flushed red, and for a moment, it looked like she might lash out. Instead, her face crumbled, and tears welled in her eyes. Jack, please, she whispered, her voice breaking. I'm trying to make things right. It's too late for that, I said flatly, brushing past her to head upstairs. I wasn't interested in her excuses. I wasn't interested in her, period. The days that followed were suffocating. Emily and I barely spoke except for curt exchanges about Alex and Ben. She had stopped apologizing and spent most of her time scrolling through her phone or texting. I didn't care who she was talking to. Robin, her mother, or someone else. None of it mattered anymore. For my sons, I focused on keeping their world as normal as possible. I helped them with homework, played games in the yard, and watched cartoons with them in the evenings. They were my anchor, the reason I could keep going. I refused to let them see the cracks forming around them, even if I felt like I was crumbling inside. Emily, however, seemed to struggle. Sometimes, I'd catch her staring at me with an unreadable expression. Was it guilt, regret, or just another calculation? I didn't care enough to ask. The woman I once trusted with my heart was gone. She was a stranger now. One night, as we cleaned up after dinner, she broke the silence. Have you told the boys yet? She asked quietly. I paused, gripping the dish towel in my hand. Not yet, I said finally. I'll tell them when the time is right. She set a plate down, her hands trembling slightly. Jack, they're going to be heartbroken. Don't you think we should tell them together? As a team. I turned to her, my jaw tight. You lost the right to be a team the moment you chose to cheat, I said evenly. I'll tell them when I'm ready, and I'll decide how much they need to know. You've already done enough damage. Her face crumpled, but I didn't stick around to watch her cry. I walked out of the kitchen, leaving her to sit alone with her feelings, whatever they were. As the days passed, Clyde and I kept digging into Carl. The more we learned, the clearer it became that he was exactly what I had expected. Charming, entitled, and reckless. His ex-wife had left him after uncovering numerous affairs, and he had a reputation for targeting married women. He thrived on the chaos he caused, leaving destruction in his wake. But Carl wasn't my only focus. I needed to know exactly how far Emily's betrayal had gone. This wasn't about revenge, it was about protecting Alex and Ben. To do that, I needed proof. Late one night, after Emily had gone to bed, I waited until I was sure she was asleep. Her phone sat on the nightstand, and it didn't take much to unlock it. She had been using the same passcode for years. My hands shook as I scrolled through her messages, bracing myself for what I might find. The texts between her and Carl were worse than I had imagined. Explicit photos and videos filled the thread, along with messages that made my stomach churn. She hadn't just cheated physically. She had given him a part of herself that I thought was mine alone. And the worst part? She mocked me in those texts, calling me clueless and dismissing my feelings entirely. But those messages also gave me something I could use, evidence. Proof of her infidelity, her cruelty, and her disregard for our family. I forwarded everything to my email, saving copies for the divorce. It wasn't a proud moment, but it was necessary. A few nights later, I confronted her. We were in the living room. The boys were upstairs brushing their teeth. Emily was scrolling through her phone when I decided it was time. I know about the messages, I said, my voice calm but firm. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. What are you talking about? I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. Don't play dumb, Emily. I've seen the texts, the photos, the videos. I know everything. Her face went pale, and she set her phone down, her hands trembling. Jack, I didn't mean for you to see that. It wasn't. Don't, I interrupted. Don't try to explain it away. Just admit what you did. For a moment, she stared at me, searching for words. Then finally she gave up. Fine, she said bitterly. Yes, I cheated. But don't act like you're innocent, Jack. You were never here. Carl made me feel alive again. I clenched my fists, forcing myself to stay calm. So this is my fault? Is that what you're saying? Her silence said it all. She'd already justified her actions, blaming me to ease her guilt. It made one thing clear. This marriage was unsalvageable. You made your choice, I said, standing up. Now it's my turn. That night I didn't sleep. After Emily's hollow attempts to justify her affair, I left the house and sat at Clyde's, lost in thought. The pain of her actions, the threat of losing Alex and Ben, and the uncertainty of what lay ahead consumed me. By morning, I was resolute. I couldn't let her take my boys. The next day, I met with my lawyer and handed her the evidence I'd gathered from Emily's phone. She reviewed the texts, photos, and videos with a calm professionalism that steadied me. This helps, she said. It proves her infidelity, but custody decisions are about stability. Right now, you're staying with your brother. You'll need to find your own place soon. I nodded. I find a home for my boys. What else? Stay calm, she advised. No fights with Emily. Let me handle the legal side. Returning to the house was unbearable. Emily and I avoided each other. But one evening, she stormed into the room while I was helping the boys with homework. We need to talk, she demanded. Not now, I said, keeping my voice steady. Why are you trying to take the boys from me? She snapped. I'm their mother. They need me. They need stability, I countered. Not a home where their mother sneaks off with another man. Her face turned red, and she stormed out, slamming the door. I exhaled shakily, knowing the worst was still to come. A few days later, I sat Alex and Ben down. They deserved the truth, or as much of it as I could give them. Your mom and I have decided we're not going to live together anymore, I said gently. Why? Ben asked, his eyes brimming with tears. Sometimes, grown-ups stop getting along, I explained. But we both love you, and that will never change. Alex frowned. Is it Mom's fault? I hesitated. It's not about fault. It's just something we need to do. Ben clung to me, sobbing, while Alex walked upstairs silently. Watching them hurt broke me, but I knew this was the only way forward. When Ben had calmed down a little, I pulled him close and kissed the top of his head. Buddy, I know this feels scary right now, but I promise you, everything is going to be okay. You and Alex are my whole world. That's never going to change. He sniffled, wiping his tears on his sleeve. But where are you going to go? Will we still see you? You're going to see me all the time, I reassured him. I'm not going anywhere far, and I'll always be here for you. We'll have so much fun together, just like we always have. Okay? Ben nodded slowly, but the sadness in his eyes didn't fade. Can you still come to my soccer games? Of course I will, I said, trying to smile. I wouldn't miss a single one. Just then, Alex came back downstairs, his expression guarded. He sat down across from me, folding his arms. Is this because of what Mom did? He asked bluntly. The question hit me like a punch to the gut. I took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. Alex, what's happening between your mom and me is really complicated. But none of it is your fault, and none of it changes how much we both love you. He frowned. You didn't answer my question. I sighed, feeling the weight of his gaze. Sometimes, grown-ups make mistakes, I said carefully. And sometimes, those mistakes make it hard to stay together. But I promise you, Alex, this isn't about who's right or wrong. It's about making sure you and Ben are happy and safe. Alex looked down, picking at a loose thread on the couch. I don't want things to change, he muttered. I know, I said softly. And if I could make this easier for you, I would. But no matter what happens, I'll always be here. You can talk to me about anything, anytime. For a moment, neither of them said anything. Then Ben crawled into my lap again, clutching me tightly, while Alex stayed where he was, his expression unreadable. My heart broke for them, but I knew this conversation was just the first of many difficult moments we'd face together. The weeks after I filed for divorce were some of the hardest of my life. The house, once a place of warmth and laughter, felt cold and tense. Every interaction with Emily was like walking a tightrope, strained, unpredictable, and exhausting. The boys, despite my best efforts, couldn't escape the tension. Alex became quiet and withdrawn, spending most of his time in his room, while Ben clung to me constantly, afraid I'd disappear if he let go. Emily's behavior swung wildly. Some days, she tried to act as if nothing had changed, making small talk or pretending we were still a functioning family. Other days, she was combative, accusing me of ruining her life or trying to manipulate me with guilt. I didn't bite. I was done playing her games. When Emily was served with the divorce papers, she retaliated immediately. Her lawyer, a smug and overconfident man, filed a counterpetition demanding full custody of Alex and Ben, the house, and alimony. Everything she'd threatened before was now on paper, but my lawyer remained calm. This is a scare tactic, she reassured me during one of our meetings. They're overreaching, hoping you'll cave. But we have solid evidence. Stay the course, and don't engage with her provocations. I took her advice to heart, documenting everything. Emily's late-night outings, her erratic behavior, and my time with the boys. I kept a journal detailing the meals I cooked, the homework I helped with, and the games we played. I wasn't going to let her paint me as an absentee father. The custody hearing was brutal. Emily's lawyer portrayed me as a distant father who worked too much and neglected his family. He claimed I was emotionally unavailable, while Emily tried to present herself as a victim, a lonely wife driven to her mistake by my supposed neglect. When my lawyer presented the evidence, the tone in the courtroom shifted. The texts, photos, and videos from Emily's affair painted a clear picture of where her priorities had been. I focused on the boys, explaining how much they meant to me and how I'd worked tirelessly to provide for them. The judge ultimately ruled in my favor, granting us joint custody but naming me the primary custodial parent. The boys would live with me full-time, while Emily was given visitation rights. It wasn't an outright win, but it was enough. I had fought for my sons and secured their stability. After the ruling, Emily moved into an apartment nearby. The house, now free from her toxic presence, felt quieter, calmer. Alex still struggled, often retreating into himself, but I gave him space while assuring him I was there whenever he needed me. Ben, on the other hand, seemed to adjust quickly, finding joy in our new routines. We established traditions to rebuild our family life. Saturday mornings became pancake day, and Friday nights were movie marathons in the living room. Slowly, the house started to feel like a home again. Months later, Emily arrived to pick up the boys for her weekend visit. She looked different, tired, subdued, almost like a shadow of the woman I once knew. After the boys ran to the car, she hesitated on the porch. "Can we talk?" she asked softly. I crossed my arms but nodded, stepping outside. She looked down, her voice trembling. "Chris, I'm sorry. For everything. I don't expect forgiveness, but I need you to know I regret what I did." Her words surprised me, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The anger I'd carried for so long began to lift, replaced by a strange sense of peace. "I don't hate you, Emily," I said quietly. "But I can't forgive you, not yet, maybe not ever. What you did broke something in me, and I don't know if it'll ever heal. But I appreciate you saying that. I hope you find what you're looking for." Tears welled in her eyes, and she nodded before driving away. As I watched her taillights disappear, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The life I had known was gone, but for the first time, I felt free. I turned back to the house, where Alex and Ben's laughter echoed through the windows. They were my world, my reason for moving forward. Together, we would build a new life, one stronger and more resilient than ever before.